It's a couple of minutes after the top of the hour, but it is what it is. 22nd of March, 2023, the moment, the hour cometh. And of course, this is the summit. We are scaling heights to bring you what you need, and that is conversations from across the world when it comes to different issues that matter to you, where we are putting them on the table to dissect them and make sense out of them. And of course, this is your show, and all you need to do is get in touch with us, talk to us through all the available platforms. That is on Twitter, and the hashtag, as always, is the Summit RW. You need to add that every time you tweet, and any comment that you make, please remember to add that particular hashtag. It is very important because it helps us to be able to track and sample some of the comments that you are sending concerning the conversations we have. We had actually put out something out there concerning the show tonight, and I want us just to sample some of that as we set out to start the conversation that we have today. And we've been asking you what you feel and what you think about the topic for tonight. And one of the tweets, Jean-Luc Ishimwe says, at the Summit RW with the greatest one, Eugene Anangwe, very humbled, and I'm very happy to be here. And of course, Janet Schaefer says, and responds to what we had tweeted earlier on, and he says, yes, let the message reach the administration. All seems to have landed on deaf ears for those few months Kenya Kwanza has been in power. We're trying to look into the issue of consensus politics and whether this is something that the continent should be looking into. And I want you to be part of this conversation because we are on for another great show. And my name, as always, is Eugene Anangwe. Let me introduce my panelists on the show who are joining us from far and wide. I'm not alone. Of course, it might look like that, but technology is what it is, and it is helping us to connect with our viewers and our audience, and of course, those who are joining us as part of the conversation tonight. Allow me to introduce for the very first time to the Rwandan audience, the Pan-African audience is right here, Javas Bigambo, who's a governance expert, joining us all the way from Nairobi, Kenya. Javas, thank you so much for making time to join us on the summit. Also with us is none other than Ongama Mtimka, who's a political analyst, joining us from the Nelson Mandela University. That is where he's based in South Africa. Thank you so much for making time to join us on this particular conversation tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Indeed. And of course, we also have Ndegwa Njiru, who's a constitutional lawyer, also joining us from Nairobi. Gentlemen, it is important that I also make a disclaimer that we had invited Carol Kariuki, who's the CEO of the Kenya Private Sector Alliance. And on last minute, she got engaged on some other pressing matters, and she will not be able to join us on the show. However, the show must continue. I want to start off, first of all, with our brothers from Nairobi. We saw a lot of showdowns across Nairobi. We saw something in South Africa. There was, some commotion as well in Tunisia. Let me start off with Nairobi. Javas, from where you sit, I mean, what do you read from the events that took place in Nairobi, and of course the announcements that now, the protests are going to be taking place every Monday and Thursday, from a perspective of solutions-focused initiatives? Do you see anything tangible coming out of this from where you speak? And maybe for our viewers who might not be understanding the context of what's going on in Nairobi, maybe you could also take some time and share with us. Javas. Javas, is it your sound that is on mute?
Eugene, can you hear me?
Yes, now I can hear you. Yes, let's go now. Let's take it one more time.
All right. Yeah, sure. Monday this week was a very exciting period, or day rather, given that it was the first response by people who are the followers and admirers, or if you like, sympathizers of the Azimio coalition led by Honorable Raila Odinga, who was a candidate in the August 2022 general election. And of course, the critical issues that advanced or are being advanced by Azimio as the basis upon which the demonstrations were called a part of the 8-point agenda, but I'll single out a few issues. One of them is the high cost of living. Second, there is the allegation of high taxation. 3, there is the discontent on the part of Raila Odinga and Azimio with the outcome of the August 2022 general election, where he still claims that he is the legitimate winner or victor of that election and that President William Ruto is not, as well as other issues. Now, well, these issues are mixed up. Some of them quite critical, urgent, and legitimate. Others that may not necessarily be so pressing, because among the 8-point agenda issues that Raila Odinga has outlined includes that the claim that, for example, the Kenya Kwanza government led by Dr. William Ruto has not fulfilled its mandate since it took office about 6 months ago. All this is springing from the August 8th election. Of course, as the world knows, as Kenyans know, is that Honorable Raila Odinga has not conceded defeat, and he has not acknowledged the legitimacy of the authority of the government as led by Honorable William Ruto as the President of Kenya. So all these things, jumbled up as they are, constitute the basis upon which the protests and demonstrations have been called by Azimio led by Honorable Raila Odinga. So there are critical legal issues, critical political issues, and other socioeconomic issues that are part of the significant agenda being set by Honorable Raila Odinga, which now has informed him that he needs to press the urgency button even further. And now he has slated every Monday and Thursday of every week as days marked for demonstrations in the country.
Yeah, yeah. And I want to hear also from Ongama. In South Africa, we also, saw similar scenes, of protest in the streets of South Africa. From where you sit, I mean, let's try to make sense of what was taking place there and the overall goal. And at the end of it all, I mean, what is the place of consensus politics, in avoiding such scenarios, or, the grievances that are being put out there by those who are pushing for these ways of pressing, administrations to act on some of the things that they feel are pressing? Is this the way to go, really?
Sure. Good evening to you and your viewers in Rwanda. It's an honor to be, on your platform. It's interesting that the issues are almost similar, save for the fact that we haven't had a recent election in South Africa. What's happened recently is that the chairperson or the president, or the so-called commander-in-chief of the Economic Freedom Fighters, the third biggest political party in South Africa, which is a splinter of the governing party, the African National Congress, called for a national shutdown as a way to express public anger over the rampant load shedding, a word for power blackouts in the country, because South Africa has suffered energy insecurity since the late 2007. But in recent years, there has been allegations that the state utility, which is the sole provider of electricity in South Africa, is acting in bad faith in order to precipitate a rapid process towards energy transition to renewable energies. And the recent chief executive, that entity actually has lost its chief executive, and South Africans are experiencing long periods of load shedding, and there are concerns about how that could cripple various industries in the country, and the cost is estimated at billions of rands. The frustrating issue is that there wasn't a feeling that President Cyril Ramaphosa was getting a control of the situation, and South Africans have faced rising interest rates. Inflation stabilized in the last quarter of last year, but data that came out today shows that inflation has gone back up again. So there are concerns about a rising cost of living.
Yeah.
So the EFF, in a nutshell, is was foregrounding those issues, demanding for the resignation of the president. But there's a view that they're also kickstarting their election campaign for the next national general election next year.
I hear you. And I want to hear from Ndego. Ndego, you are a constitutional lawyer, but from what I've seen, you have actually been a pro what is going on in Nairobi today in terms of the pressure being mounted on the government of the day. But what I'm going to ask, from where you sit and from even your own, what you do as a constitutional lawyer, why not use the constitutional, ways to fix whatever is being mentioned as part of the grievances? Because there are those who are asking, at what point then has the Kenyan constitution failed for it to be able to allow for what is actually going on today? And is it even possible to reverse some of the constitutionally, stuff that the government of the day is saying, look, we are going to just stick to what the Constitution says. We have proceeded to actually go ahead in the appointment of the membership of the IEBC. The president elected was actually, there was a contest. It went through the Supreme Court as dictated by the Constitution. The Supreme Court made a ruling out of it. Where is the space for what the Constitution says in dealing with these issues, to a point that now this mass action is being seen as the way forward?
Thank you, Nangwe. Thank you, the viewers, and even the ones that are listening us from South Africa. This is a great Pan-African debate that has enjoined people who are suffering from the same struggle. The EFF in South Africa and the Azimio la Umoja in Kenya are suffering from the same cause of struggle. And the cause of struggle has been necessitated by the constitutional suppression of the sovereignty of the people and the voice of the people. The reason why we have advocated for the streets is because, just like in South Africa, and I've been following the South African Parliament closely, which squares out one for one with the Kenyan parliamentary system, is that in South Africa, the majority have decided to suppress the minority. And so it is even here in Kenya, that the majority, who in Kenya Kwanza, they have decided to suppress the minority in parliament. What am I saying? I'm saying that in those two countries, parliament has become an extension of the executive. And remember, it is in parliament, Anangwe, that we speak about the question of representation. It is in parliament that we speak about the question of oversight. When the South African parliament is suppressing the EFF through Comrade Malema, the Kenyan parliament is suppressing the Azimio la Umoja members of parliament. So the people are left without any avenue of ventilating their issues. We are left without any avenue of ventilating our grievances. And so the only thing that remains, both in South Africa and in Kenya, is for the people to take to the streets. And remember, taking to the streets, Anangwe, is a constitutional provision. And our constitution has largely borrowed from the South African constitution. And the South African constitution, just like the Kenyan constitution, has appreciated the place of mass action. It has appreciated the mass of people exercising their sovereignty directly. So what happens here, Anangwe, is that as a result of this suppression, as a result of this constitutional exclusion, and as a result of this political exclusion by the majority who are in government, people are left with only one way of venting their grievances, and that is to take to the streets. For example, when it becomes the question of the amendment of the IBC Act, and to the formula in which the commission was to be constituted, the whole process was rushed through parliament. There was no quality debate. There was no public participation that was done. And when it was done in a skewed manner. Let me bring things fast forward. Just as close as yesterday, Cabinet passed a bill, an unconstitutional bill, that is geared towards privatization of public property. And what has happened today in Parliament? Shamelessly, the leader of majority in Parliament, even without giving it a constitutional thinking, has tabled that bill to Parliament. And you know what, Anangwe? The bill will pass through because Parliament has been captured by the executive in this country. And so that is the tragedy, that is the democratic tragedy we find ourselves in.
Yeah.
And for us to be able to redeem the democratic space and redeem our constitution, we have to go to the streets and express ourselves in a manner that makes sense to them that are in government.
Interesting that you mentioned that, and I want to bring in Javas from a governance perspective and also from a constitutional perspective. Javas, listening into what Dego is saying, and let's pick out one of the issues that is actually a teething point here, and that is the legitimacy of the current regime, which, as Emil says, they do not recognize the current president because they don't accept that he actually won in a fair and square manner. Look, the Constitution provided avenues of dealing with this issue. There is the aspect of if you're not contented with this, you can actually be able to petition the Supreme Court and file a petition to challenge the results. That was done. And the Supreme Court did actually pronounce itself on this particular issue. Fast forward, we are now, close to 90 days actually or more after the vote. And we're talking about reversing all that after going through all those particular processes because there's a whistleblower who the president actually is saying is unknown. We can't know who this person is. Is there even a possibility of this under the current Kenyan constitution, of reversing all these things at this point in time?
Eugene, that's a very deep and important question altogether. And as I respond to that, I would also reflect a bit on what my brother Njiro has said. And of course, some issues that have been raised by my brother Njiro are not quite factual, or there is some slippery statements that he has made. For instance, one that Parliament yesterday passed a bill about privatization. Parliament did not pass that bill. It was the cabinet that deliberated on that. And the cabinet's approval then will follow with a parliamentary discussion through the legislative process. Secondly, he said that with regard to the amendment of the IEBC Act, that there was no public participation, and then he ended up saying that if it happened in a very rushed way. There is no statute in Kenya that can pass muster and be assented into by the president if it has not had public participation and if Parliament has not debated the issues contained in that particular bill on the floor of the House. Now, the thing is, if we're to talk about the push and pull between the opposition and the executive, today there was a very important discussion on the floor of the House, the Parliament in Kenya, about the cost of electricity. And Parliament was not even populated by a third of its membership, including members from the opposition. So the priorities of the parliamentarians are elsewhere. And that's why they are playing politics and not speaking to critical issues of public interest. Now, of course, my brother Njeru was spoken to issues to do with the parliament having been, or the executive having procured various parliamentarians from the opposition, and therefore that necessitates going to the street. As a matter of fact, we know that all the issues that are happening today following the legitimate discontent or discontent on the part of Raila Odinga about the outcome of the election, Honorable Raila Odinga is exploring all avenues and exercising his political rights as provided for in Article 37 of the Constitution But as a matter of fact, we know that this is political fundamentalism to explore our personal interests. All this, of course, fashioned as public interest. Now, we know very well that the issue of the cost of living is very important. And in fact, the people have got a right to raise and even picket and demonstrate anytime.
Yeah.
The issue of the high taxation, very crucial. But look, let's face it. If it's a question of the outcome of the election, we cannot lose faith in the constitutional mechanisms that have been provided for in the mother of, or the source of laws of this country that the Constitution is. And in fact, having exhausted the mechanisms of arbitration, because the Supreme Court is the one that arbitrates over a presidential petition and settles the matter finally.
Correct.
I think the pursuit presently by Azimio and the Honorable Raila Odinga, a celebrated politician, will not yield much with regard to any imagined reversal of the outcome of the presidential election held in August 2022. And in fact, the issue of the victory of Honorable Raila Odinga and claiming and sustaining such argument will remain just simulacrum, will remain a figment of imagination, because this election has been done, dusted, and the only thing that can change the status of President William Ruto is either an act of God or an election that will happen in 2027.
Right. And before I bring Ndegwa to do a rejoin, I want to talk to Mr. Ongama. I mean, we've had Javas talk about, the outcome, the expected outcome of those who are actually pursuing this way of putting or piling pressure on, the governments where they are to be able to achieve what they feel needs to be done, as opposed to a matter of looking for other alternatives, including consensus building and all that. When it comes to South Africa, what do you see as the end game, the outcome of whatever has been going on right there from what we saw in the part of this week?
In fact, there are correlations here. One, there are grievances that are well known. Two, there is the role played by an opposition grouping. And thirdly, I think it's more complex in Kenya with the recent election and the results thereof. In South Africa, the issues, and I think also in Kenya, this issue of how the state handled the protests. The issue was that, one, many of us were saying the opposition political party has taken the right issues, and that it is they who have an agenda which may be different from what the average South African, wants, is secondary to the issue of the fact that there are national grievances that need to be attended to.
Yeah.
However, the state, in responding to the security threats elements within those protests, needed to deploy the army in South Africa. And I was one among a few people that are arguing that we mustn't allow our idealism about, what role should be played by the police vis-a-vis the army in public order policing, and allow that to cloud our judgment when the state assesses a security risk and makes a situational decision to say the best response is to actually, quell the storm in that way and arrest people who are destroying public property. Because the very same people who are complaining about a cost of living, are going to be concerned about the infrastructure that is being destroyed as a result of the march. So I find those correlations to be quite interesting.
Interesting. And I want to hear from Ndegwa. Ndegwa, I mean, what's the end goal? Look, we had from the Deputy President talking about over 20 billion lost just on that particular day. Nairobi County itself lost over 40, we're talking about 40 million or something, just from vandalism and all that. In South Africa, we had of loss of lives, including in Kenya. Young students, university students were losing their lives. So what's the end goal? I mean, Isn't there any other way of dealing with these issues other than going to the streets?
Allow me to remind our viewers and those that were not in Kenya, never followed the Kenya situation, is that it is the police that is killing the demonstrators. It is not the demonstrators that are killing the police. The police is the one that is using live ammunition against unarmed members of public who are deliberately exercising their constitutional right. The unfortunate thing is that the government of the day did not support the constitution processes in 2010, and they therefore do not appreciate when we say that there is a constitutional right to picketing and to demonstration.
That's fine, Ndegwa. What I'm asking is, now, the end goal is what? Look, at the end of the day, if the government loses this money in terms of the losses to businesses, the lack of revenue in terms of taxes because people close down their shops, the losses of lives and all that, how then do you end up achieving the goals of the listed items that you want achieved in the end?
Says that we have taken to prosecute in the public domain or in the court of public opinion is that our people are hungry. There is no medicine. Our people are oppressed. I'm asking one simple question. If we are complaining of loss of 2 billion, where is this 2 billion? Where was it yesterday when there was no demonstration that the same has not been appropriated towards finding a solution of the high cost of living? Where was that money yesterday and last week, the 2 billion every day? That the same is lacking in circulation to the extent that now the dollar is exchanging at 100 and almost 40. So the argument that the demonstrations are fettering the processes of revenue generation is defeatist in itself. For one simple reason, that the money that they want to save is not being appropriated towards alleviating the plight of the people. And the idea is this: we are not only looking at the economic perspective, because the economic perspective must have a solid foundation of the political foundation. When the political foundation is shaking, the social foundation will shake, and the economic foundation will shake. And what I'm simply saying is, nobody should underrate the place of public or public demonstration. I would remind our viewers that in 1879, King Louis XVI was brought down by mass action. Our viewers must remember that Mahatma Gandhi, the father of the non-violence movement, was able to change the course of what we know today as India. We should not lose sight that Malcolm X, together with Luther King Jr., were able to change the place and the plight of the black Americans through the use of mass action. Again,
the context, I'm sure, are very different from these examples that you give. But I want to understand, from basics in terms of the end goal. For how long then, and then what? Those are some of the questions that I'm sure some of our viewers would love to understand.
You see, we have until the day the grievances that we are prosecuting in the public arena are met to the satisfaction of the people who are leading the people's liberation, to the extent that they will address those ones to the satisfaction of the people, then we will have a conversation. But remember one thing, Anangwe. Remember one key thing. This is a government that has said that they are running this government as a company. What that means, Anangwe, is that they have completely decided to exclude any person who did not vote for them. So over half of the country, or actually 3/4 of the country, have been excluded from the table. We have become spectators. The government says they cannot touch us, they cannot hear us, they cannot listen to us, they cannot talk to us. Yet, we need to move together as a cohesive nation. So until those issues are addressed, our people will go to the streets.
Interesting. Javas, I want to hear your take on where we went wrong, especially when it comes to inclusive politics, and whether we have the time to salvage this, especially from what we call the consensus model of politics. I mean, if you look at the Kenyan situation and probably other jurisdictions, we know that, there is what we call the winner takes it all. Is this where the rain started beating these countries that have this kind of political model, whereby, you have a number two who commands, almost half of the population that voted, but they get totally nothing because they did not win, elective position at the top job. Is this where the problem is coming from? And how do we remodel this to have a scenario where everybody feels this is our country? Anytime we blow up anything or shoot down someone or break a window right there, it is actually for us. We are killing our own selves. We are making ourselves bleed. How long and when will we have this kind of thinking to be able to fix our democracies in that particular perspective?
Eugene, you ask what the problem is and where the rain started beating us. In fact, the rain has always been beating us. There's no point where we can say that it's a particular station when it started. The rain has always been beating us right from the time of independence, or even way before. Secondly, there are critical issues that are absent in our body politic.
Yeah.
One is political ethicism. Two is the place of values. That we even make or develop values, develop statutes that we intend to serve in our interest against other persons and not for all of us as a collective. We expect that laws should help us to hold other people to account and not ourselves. That is the other problem. But when I look at it, even from what Ndegwa said, and some things I think could be not just unbundled, but debunked. First, I think it is a bit erroneous and inaccurate to say that the government is only serving those persons that voted for it. Where can it be established that particular persons are identified that voted or did not vote? It cannot be established. It is only a matter of presumption or assumption, rather.
Yeah.
Secondly, I think one thing that we need to have a discussion about is not just a matter of occupying office. It is a matter of looking at the framework of our democracy and making it work in our interest, not for the interest just of the political elites who in Kenya have hijacked the process. I can tell you even what Brother Ndegwa is talking about, the pre-referendum issues in 2010, pre-2010 issues of the politics and who supported the constitution and not. All these things are bourgeois interests. And in fact, even the kind of politics that's playing out in Kenya today, I can tell you that a few critical public interest issues have been used to cover the bourgeois conspiracy, and now the proletariat are just tools in the hands of the bourgeoisie to advance their interests. So the people are always being used as tools, whether a particular government, a community is in government or not.
Yeah.
So the people have always been left out of the equation. That is where the problem is. We even in Kenya came up with the devolved system of governance.
Yeah.
This devolved system of governance has still devolved the class system where some communities or some clans get to control and have a sway of the power and resources within county governments, while the other communities and the other classes get to be disadvantaged. So the issue here about inclusivity is that we have got the flag of individualism being hoisted all through and all times. In fact, even majority of politicians who are in the opposition right now, if they were to be in government, they would want to advance individualism to benefit themselves and those who are close to them. Yeah. And that is the problem. We do not look at government as an entity or an enterprise that's supposed to serve the collective and the whole. We look at it in terms of benefiting ourselves. Just as a close, let me give the example of even, say, Japan. What is it that would make a cabinet secretary or a government official in Japan commit suicide or, in fact, relinquish office the moment he or she has been implicated in a graft case, or when his or her ministry has been flagged or earmarked for poor performance?
Yeah.
They resign. It's about values, it's about conscientiousness. And I think that's what lacks here in East Africa, in Africa, and particularly in Kenya, that governance is seen as an avenue to advance personal interests and not to serve the people.
Interesting. Ongama, what's your take on this, especially when it comes to the aspects of, what has been termed as democracy? For those who sometimes even talk about it, they would say, Kenya, one of the biggest democracies in East Africa. On the flip side, we have those who would be like, this is what you call democracy? They would be like, I think I have a problem with that. Talk to us a bit about that understanding of the place of consensus and the place of politics that is not destructive to the level of the magnitude that we've seen this week. You've muted your mic, Ongama. You can unmute. Thank you so much.
Sure. Sorry about that. So there are two things to bear in mind. Is that the political development of the two countries is slightly nuanced. In South Africa, the constitutional values are largely entrenched. We haven't had an election yet that is challenged, and therefore have not had the kind of grievance exploitation that can be associated with failure to accept democratic outcomes.
Yeah.
However, the same issues of an exclusive economy, in terms of which, in fact, it's quite the reverse in South Africa, where the minority, historically white elites still control the economy of the country, and in fact have driven foreign direct investment into the rest of the continent, and have an extractive attitude towards the economy of the country, and have co-opted politicians into a system of racial capitalism. So the challenge then is acknowledging how path dependent countries are when it comes to progressing towards a stabilized democracy. But at the center of it is whether or not the economies are inclusive. And there's quite a lot that still needs to be done in the continent as far as democratizing production and distribution processes. And the role of the state has become critical in ensuring that there's growth of industries which are owned and controlled by the excluded. People have this tendency of saying we need to migrate away from primary industries, whereas in fact that migration should be driven by lots of productivity in primary sectors such as agriculture and mining, and then leveraging with industrialization as well as commercial sectors. Only in that way are we going to be able to create mass jobs for people, and therefore make them less likely or less susceptible to manipulation by badly meaning politicians.
Ndegwa, I think if you're still with us, I want to throw this question to you on the aspect of some of the questions I've asked when it comes to consensus. Do you see this happening? Do you see a sense of, those who are within the political spaces or positions of influence saying, look, for the sake of the country, I'm going to be the bigger person, because we are seeing that much as we want to pursue or push for grievances through the streets, but it has its cons that are actually affecting all of us as a nation. Let us get to the table and have a conversation on dealing with the issues that affect all of us as a nation, a country called Kenya. Is this something that is possible from where you sit? Is it something that you could be thinking about from the quarters that you mingle and integrate in?
May I say that during this time, Anangwe, the extractive regime, and I insist, the current extractive brutal regime has taken to its heels and said that they will not speak to anyone because they won the election. The conversation that we can only have is a conversation that will address the grievances that have been brought forth. And may I mention that other than just speaking from the tops of our vehicles and from the streets, on Monday we had set ourselves to present a petition to the president for his consideration. And that petition would have formed the basis upon which perhaps a conversation would have ensued. And what the people met was serious police brutality, preventing the presentation of that petition. Had that petition been presented to the president, he would have realized that the petition has formed the basis, or it would have invited people, perhaps on a round table, to think the mechanisms of how to address the current challenge. But now, what this extractive regime has taken is a quite toxic position, because for them they have taken a position that Raila Odinga, Mheshimiwa Martha Karua, Mheshimiwa Kalonzo Musyoka, Mheshimiwa Jeremiah Kioni, Mheshimiwa Eugene Wamalwa, Mheshimiwa Oparanya and others are pushing or are going to the streets to make sure that they get half of the government, what we notoriously call here in Kenya as nusu mkate. They have completely misconceived the whole idea. So they have blocked the entire process. We cannot even negotiate these things in parliament, because in parliament, they have bought all members of Azimio party. To the extent that in parliament, our people have been reduced to a voiceless minority. And then we have our people in parliament have been banked up like they are in opposition. And I have Javas mentioned the word opposition severally. Whereas our constitution is very clear that in this country we do not have an opposition. They have decided to look at the minority as the opposition. And one thing, Javas, we must all understand, and our viewers and our listeners must understand, is that the Kenyan constitution has defined how parliament will be administered. And it has created two sides. It has created the side of the majority and the side of the minority. But irrespective of whichever side one may be, both the majority and the minority have three functions. The first function is to oversight government. The second function is to legislate. The third function is to present. Let me address the question of oversight. And the reason why people will go to the street on Monday, on Thursday, on Monday, on Thursday, until the grievance is heard. Parliament have decided to negate its duty. They have decided to limit their powers. They have decided to negatively legislate, to curtail their ability to oversight government.
But I want to ask you this question. You say that you wanted to march to State House to present a petition. This is what you say. And you say that that petition, could have had X, Y, Z that could have at least formed the basis of a conversation. Have you seen, or did you see that petition yourself?
Yeah, the petition is there. It is well drafted, raising very grievous issues. I saw the petition. The petition is there.
And so,
I saw it. Yes.
And so you believe that even if today, the faction that you support was to come to power, they would turn around the current situation in Kenya, like, by a snap, that the cost of living will go down, the drought crisis will also just disappear. What would be the basis of feeling that you can be able to achieve this?
Anangwe, there is something that we are all missing. We are all missing out. That one of the things that affect a country's economy grievously is the ability of a country and the political class to instill confidence, even to our external investors, foreign investors, and internal investors. Now, if you have an extractive regime that is not instilling confidence to our people, that is domestically and internationally, then there is no way you can stabilize the economy. If Azimio la Umoja took, or rather was in a position of power, they would have won one key and major link of instilling confidence. This confidence would have brought state the foreign exchange. It would have brought with it the foreign investment issues, and those are what is lacking. Our people confidence. The foreigners do not have. Let me give you one point. Why the foreigners do not even have confidence. The regime has taken it to itself that they are even going to start kicking people out of their land. You have heard members of parliament saying that they are going to incite the people that Javas was calling the proletariat to invade people's land.
I did not hear that. I don't know. I don't know where that is. That is able to be substantiated right here on this particular show. I will not be able to substantiate that. I did not see any of that. I did not hear that. But what I heard was the issue of the company, the nation or the Ghanaian government being a company from that perspective. But I want us to start wrapping up because we're also running out of time. Where do we go from here, Javas? I want you to just tell us in a nutshell, under 30 seconds. No room for consensus because the current regime has refused to talk to us, and we think we're doing the right thing as per the Constitution. I mean, where do we go from here?
Well, we need to go where sobriety leads us, not anarchy and not mere politics. The issue of the right to demonstrate is in the Constitution. It is captured in Article 20 of the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. It is captured in Article 21 of the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights. It is captured in Article 10 of the Banjul Protocol and the Constitution of Kenya in Article 37. This is very crucial, and we know very well that all these articles that I've made mention of or cited provide that every kind of demonstration or protest must be peaceable, or people should be unarmed. Even Azimio, for instance, has written to the security agencies, the police, to provide security. That demonstrates that they are pursuing that channel. It's also important that, for example, in what has been demonstrated by EFF in South Africa, Azimio should have marshals that guide its people not to destroy property, because people misconstrue demonstrations to mean looting, violence, hitting the police or fighting the police. That's not necessary, because even in Kibra here in Kenya, in Nairobi, it is the people who started throwing stones at the police. So I think we need to be sober enough as a people to ensure that we do not risk the businesses of ordinary people because we're pursuing certain political interests. Because when politicians incite the people get incited and they get to be destructive.
Perfect. Thank you. Ongama, just in under like 20 seconds, where do we go from here? The way forward is what? Your mic is muted.
Unless they precipitate a crisis. And I think that it's important for governments in the continent to listen and address issues and stop, responding based on who is bringing the matters to the table.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I think it is particularly that time that we start wrapping up, and part of the process of wrapping up is just really quickly checking out some of the feedback that has been coming through during the particular conversation. I just quickly look into the hashtag. Like I said earlier on, it is the hashtag that we are following throughout the show to enable us to be able to understand what you're saying. I have Aina Think Tank who says, what can large countries like Kenya, South Africa, Nigeria do to avoid the continuous chaos leading to violence, death of citizens, and disorder in the name of freedom? If those countries can't apply consensus politics like Rwanda or Japan, what's the alternative? That's a very interesting tweet right there. I have Chris who is saying, but Anangwe, isn't this an issue related to inflation, which is rampant all over the world, which is now being used by opposition leaders to try to regain power or destabilize current governments? Remember, this conversation has to continue, and it continues beyond the four walls right here, and it continues on our online platforms. And the hashtag to always add is the summit RW. We'll definitely be able to continue this conversation in the course of the week, and we'll be able to have another interesting topic next week, Wednesday, 9 p.m. I want to say thank you to our panelists who joined us from far and wide in Nairobi and in South Africa. Thank you so much for making time. And on behalf of Carol, who also was not able to make it, we want to say thank you for making time. As always, my name is Eugene Anangwe. Goodbye.